If you thought I was done talking about the Helminth Chrysalis after just one video, then boy are you going to be disappointed. I had no idea just how much I cared about Warframe kits until the ability to interchange them was introduced. One day I will make a video on why I'm okay with the mod system, operators, and even ability augment mods, but for now this video is specifically about how Warframe kits are and should be designed and how that both affects the Chrysalis system and how the Chrysalis system will affect the design philosophy of future Warframes. To explain what I think is a well-designed Warframe kit, let's use Nidus as an example. His 1 is stronger with his 2, because it clumps enemies together allowing for more reliable energy efficiency and mutation buildup. His 2 is stronger with his 1, because it gives you a reason to use his 2 more and do something with the setup that you gain from his 2. His 1 is stronger with his 3, partially because of the required stacks, but also partially because it does fire off another virulence from the target. His 3 is stronger with his 4 because it increases his health regeneration, so the damage reduction is more effective and thus each point of health is worth even more than it is just with his 3. His 4 is stronger with his 2 because locking down enemies makes it easier for the maggots to interact with the enemies, which is made stronger with his 1 because it detonates the maggots causing AoE damage, which is stronger because of his 2 because you force enemies into close proximity to each other, making each of the maggots more effective in their ability to hit multiple targets, but also allowing more maggots to be closer to the clump as there are more targets, which then makes his 1 stronger because there will be more detonations per activation of virulence. This is how a Warframe kit should be designed, praise Pablo, with each of the aspects of the kit directly feeding into other aspects of the kit to create a flow of ability usage that isn't just spamming the same 1 or 2 abilities over and over. These kits are complete and would be worse if any part of it were swapped out. On the other hand, you have Warframes like Inaros who say who needs abilities anyway, and will spam his 1 for a stun and melee damage increase and use his 4 if he has his augment for more survivability, as if he needs it. Swapping out his 2 or 3 is the obvious choice, because if you can get an ability that you would actually use, then why would you not take it over an ability that is never used? Inaros is an example of a Warframe that is simply a stat stick, as in a Warframe you use for their statistical benefit and not the utility that their kit offers. A strong example of a stat stick Warframe is Chroma. His 3 gives more armor and damage, and his 2 is usually used for either more health or more armor to make his 3 more effective. His 1 is rarely used as it has little to no utility, and his 4 is really only used in mid to low level defense and credit farming. Chroma's primary use is to increase the effectiveness of weaponry and to be able to survive some amount of punishment in doing so. His kit has universal benefit when used with any weapon and little to no niche with specific guns because he does not have a role that specifically benefits from using specific weapons. The reason why I'm making such a fuss about how some Warframes have more completed kits than others is that the Chrysalis system is going to disproportionately favour frames with the incomplete kits because they will have more abilities that are easily swapped out without lowering the effectiveness of the kit. Which is very upsetting to me because Warframes with complete kits are overall better designed than those with incomplete kits. As previously mentioned, Inaros has 1, maybe 2 abilities that he does actually use, leaving 2 options for which ability you want to replace for something better. Whereas a Warframe like Nidus, who has a very complete kit, will likely not want to swap out any of his abilities at all. This would be fine if there was a direct correlation to Warframe kit completion and power, but there just isn't. Mirage, Chroma, and Inaros are all stat-stick Warframes with very incomplete kits, but are all still incredibly powerful because of their ability to supplement survivability and or damage. These already powerful Warframes are going to get stronger with the option to swap out their weaker and less used abilities for better ones. On the other hand, Warframes with complete kits like Protea are going to get significantly less benefit from this system because by definition they are less likely to want to swap out any part of their kit. Not only that, but because every Warframe is going to give 1 ability, this means that any ability that comes from these more complete kits is likely going to be stronger than whatever ability incomplete kits donate. Even though we currently do not know what abilities will be available through Chrysalis, we do know that Protea will be donating 1 ability because every Warframe is donating 1 ability. But every ability Protea has is objectively good, which is something we can't say for the vast majority of Warframes out there. So if the vast majority of Warframes give their shittiest ability, there will always be the option of one of Protea's abilities, which, if it's being swapped out for a frame's shittiest ability, then it will objectively make that Warframe stronger. Can you honestly say that Mirage would not be stronger with any one of Protea's abilities instead of Sleight of Hand? Because whilst Protea's abilities are stronger in context of her kit, each one of them is still strong in a vacuum and will cause a blatant correct choice and incorrect choice when deciding what abilities each Warframe should swap out for another. On the opposite end of the spectrum, we have Limbo, a Warframe where each of his abilities make little to no sense outside of Limbo's kit. Stasis and Rift Surge are useless if there are no enemies in the Rift, Cataclysm is an ult and therefore exempt, but would be way too strong even if it wasn't exempt. Which leaves Banish, which has the potential to be busted since even if you can't use your weapons to kill the enemies unless you're in the Rift, damaging abilities like Peacemakers ignore the Rift entirely, not to mention it allows you to ignore a select number of enemies at the push of a button. This is why I do not think that every Warframe should donate 1 ability. Some Warframes have too perfect of a kit that it makes the decisions easy when compared to Warframes with imperfect kits. It's likely that each Warframe will be giving their worst yet functional ability. Well, that's not a level playing field, which I'd like to think is obvious with what we've discussed so far. Would you take Mag's Pull or literally anything from Protea's kit? I know which one I'm going with, because the utility that Pull offers does not outweigh the utility and power that each and every one of Protea's abilities offer. So even though I don't know which one of Protea's abilities will get chosen, the fact that I know one of her abilities will be chosen is enough information to know that it will be a better option than Pull. Even though Warframe is a relatively easy PvE game, balance still matters. If one tactic proves to be dramatically better than every other tactic, then players will be funneled into that playstyle, because if they don't use it, they'll fall behind everyone else and are likely going to find it harder to get a group in recruiting. I don't know if you remember Mirage Cyanoid Simulor, Zoran Coptering, Maiming Strike, or Greedy Pull Mag back in its prime, but these were all phases of Warframe where there was one dominant strategy, and if you didn't use it, then you fell behind. Because they were so strong, DE nerfed them because the question was posed, why would I play anything else? Players want to be effective without having to be a meta slave, and this piece of power creep in the form of ability transfer could cause another phase in the game where everyone has to use this one OP thing or else. Balance matters even in co-op PvE games. Monster Hunter World Iceborne forces players to use the Clutch Claw system in order to deal even reasonable amounts of damage. It's the meta. And that was a system that was introduced with the idea that it would be an extra option for players to consider. But because it was so powerful, it made it so if you didn't use it, you would fall behind. Iceborne is the most divisive game in the entire 16-year-old franchise, despite also having the highest amount of customization of power that the series has ever seen. More freedom in games is not necessarily better, since a game's challenge is defined by the limitations it places on the players to prevent them from achieving their goal without effort. This includes a time sink. Without limitations, a game has no challenge, and without challenge, there is no game. Even if you think it's fine to be able to breeze through the game with little resistance, you cannot deny that if you obtained everything in the game upon logging in for the first time, then there'll be no point in playing at all. I understand that that's an extreme example, but I hope it gets the point across that there needs to be some level of balance and challenge in the form of limitations, or else the game loses all meaning entirely and might as well be a novel. Ironically, giving the players more options with this system is going to limit the designers more to allow for more freedom but also retain some amount of balance. With the knowledge that one of the abilities of every future Warframe will be available via Chrysalis, it'd be easier to balance for the game as a whole if they made one ability of the future Warframes with Chrysalis in mind and deliberately made it meh. Something that will not have a major effect on the balance of other Warframes if it became a part of their kit. Because I don't know about you, but the idea that a new Warframe comes out and then makes older Warframes OP because of a new Chrysalis ability sounds like a bad time to design yourself into. It would be much easier if the ability donated was something shit like a small amount of damage and a knockdown. That's basically Pull and Soul Punch, and they're fine in context, so this new ability would also be fine in context. No need to think about the greater context too much if it has no effect on the greater context. This then has the negative effect of making the new Warframes deliberately shit as to not upset the balance as much. This de-incentivizes DE to make complete Warframe kits because, as repeatedly stated with Protea, if a Warframe has a complete kit, then each of their abilities is useful and therefore more likely to be more powerful in context of Chrysalis, which then causes retroactive balancing issues, where older Warframes suddenly gain a new powerful ability and have the potential to break the balancing of the game once again. Forcing every Warframe to donate one ability is a terrible idea. It incentivizes weaker and less complete designs of Warframes to be released, as the system as a whole disproportionately favors those kinds of Warframes to begin with, but it also makes it easier to not break the game. Which brings me to how the system gets balanced, because there will inevitably be broken combinations when this releases and DE are going to have to balance it in some way. In my eyes, there are 4 ways in which this can be balanced. 2 of them require this arbitrary rule of one ability for every Warframe to be dropped. If an ability is deemed too strong via Chrysalis, then either remove the option to put that ability on the problem Warframes or remove it from the system entirely. If the ability is more trouble than it's worth, then just drop it. It might seem arbitrary that certain abilities cannot go on certain frames, but the system is already arbitrary, and having a confliction that prevents certain power options being paired with certain equipment is not unprecedented. Cautious Shot and Energizing Shot are mods that cannot be equipped on weapons with AoE damage. This idea of exceptions is not new. The other 2 methods of balance are much more universal changes. They could make the ability weaker when used specifically through Chrysalis so that other Warframes do not gain the full potency of that ability, or, and I fear this may be the direction they go because it's the easiest, they could just nerf the ability universally. So even if the ability is fine on the original Warframe, it gets nerfed to compensate for all the Warframes that it's not fine on, and therefore nerfing the Warframe the ability originated from just because it's the one with the ability. That's just silly. If a Warframe is causing balancing issues, then sure, the Warframe needs to be nerfed. If it is causing balancing issues by proxy of a much more problematic system that will inevitably cause more balancing issues down the road, then maybe the system needs to get a look at instead. Until next time.